This is what Socrates is saying. They don't know anything. He goes, Socrates is like, I don't mean to discover that. I'm not trying to show them to be foolish. But God told me that I was the wisest. I know it's not true, so I'm looking for somebody who's smarter than me to prove the God wrong, right? And person after person, this doesn't work, right? The politicians doesn't work. They're not that smart. The poets, it turns out that it's only when they're doing poetry that they sound intelligent. When you sit them down and try to hash out their ideas, they're actually pretty confused. I went to one of those reputed wise, thinking that there, if anywhere, I could refute the oracle and say to it, this man is wiser than I. Then, when I examined this man, my experience was something like this. That he appeared to be wise to many people, and especially to himself, but he was not. I then tried to show him that he thought himself wise, but that he was not. As a result, here's the key idea, I get a feeling for why Socrates is on trial for his life. As a result, he came to dislike me, right? And so did many of the bystanders. Now here's the problem. What does there have to be? I mentioned this when I talked about the bees before, and the pattern that the bees dance. If there's ideas independent of your mind, what does there have to be? It seems like. What's the only sort of thing that can have ideas? A mind. Yeah, right? I mean, what's the only sort of thing that has ideas? A mind. Okay, now there's ideas that you can't change. Try it. You can't change 4 plus 4, right? Some people argue you can't change what's just and what's not, what's good and what's not. They're real things. But those aren't. In the material world anywhere. We're going to see Augustine in a couple chapters struggle with this and try to work this out almost into an argument for God's existence, saying, look, you just have to acknowledge this about our experience, that we know that there are these concepts and ideas that are unchanging. They're not dependent on our mind. We can't just decide that there's some other way and then they'll become some other way. They're unchanging, right? Goodness is unchanging. Justice is unchanging. The laws of mathematics are unchanging. The laws of physics are unchanging. They're laws, and they're clearly ideal. You can't poke them or burn them or find them in the external world. This is just Heraclitus is flux. It's all changing. The material world is decomposing and composing and generating and corrupting. You'll never find something abstract and unchanging in the material world. In 100 years, all this will be gone. Right. Okay, 1,000 years, all this will be gone. But 4 plus 4 will still equal 8. Right? So, this idea of mind dependence versus mind independence that Socrates is sort of pressing Euthyphro on here is very important. And it's going to be a bind for a lot of philosophers, okay? Plato's going to say to you, show me in the real visible world 2 things that are really evil, right? And what are you going to do? I mean, let's be thorough about this. Let's be rigorous about it, right? Plato's going to say, you claim to have this concept of equality. These 2 sticks are of the same length. Plato's going to say, how could you possibly have that concept? Equality. You say, well, I just encounter things in the world that are even, and therefore I build up this concept of evenness and equality and identity and symmetry. Plato's going to say, you've never encountered anything like that. What are you talking about? Here's 2 yardsticks. Right? They're both a yard long, right? And what's Plato going to say? They're not exactly even. At the molecular level, those 2 things aren't identical. Now you might be thinking this is petty, right? Of course, you're going to say for all intents and purposes, they're even, right? They built this room, didn't they? I mean, the guys measured out the floor, it worked, the thing's not collapsing, right? But of course, you're only speaking in a sort of loose fashion. They are not identical. But of course, they're not identical. Actually, wait a second. Juan and Jesus, you're not identical. For all intents and purposes, you are, but we're going to find some dissimilarity amongst the similarity, right? But think about this. If you never encounter it in the physical world, how do you know about it? Right? So we're speaking in a very sort of quantitative domain here. We're talking about angles and evenness and lines and points. But of course, Plato's just talking about things in this domain because he's trying to sort of flesh out his ideas. What's he really concerned with? He's concerned with the city that killed his teacher and a state that's falling apart because everybody believes something different about what's right and what's wrong. And there's all these teachers running around saying there is nothing true about what's right and what's wrong. And there really is no such thing as morality, and there really is no such thing as goodness. There's only self-advantage and self-interest. You just got to do what you got to do to get ahead. And morality is just sort of, it's nomos. It's just a sort of construct. That's what he's concerned about. He doesn't, to some degree, he doesn't care about triangles. He's trying to figure out what it is that we call knowledge and how we can know whether we have it, so that he can then go back over into this domain and prove that we have it in the moral sphere, right? In the political sphere, right? In the social sphere, in the religious sphere. He wants to get it clear over here so that he can transpose the principles over here, right? And show that we have it.
The abstract and become the reality.
There is not, says Satan, Satan to Eve in this passage, there is not a difference between you and God in kind. Okay? There is only a difference in degree. And it's precisely because there's only a difference in degree, maybe you could get there, right? Maybe you could be like him. In fact, he knows this is the case. He knows there's not this creator-creature thing that we were talking about earlier. Fundamentally, you'll never be the same, right? Asymmetry. Satan says he knows that's not the case, and he's worried that you're going to sort of encroach on his territory. So he's holding you down, right? He's oppressing you, right? I remember Thrasymachus in the Republic. Thrasymachus says, the good, the moral, is just whatever the powerful decide to make it. And they make it such. So you don't get the power. So you're the weak person in society, and you think there's this justice and morality and goodness and these rules that we ought to follow, right? But what does Thrasymachus say? He says, no, that's not really the case. Those rules that you think are goodness and right, those were made by the powerful to keep you down, man. So you got to throw off the shackles and, proletarians of the world revolt, right? Unite. That's what Satan's saying to you. Saying, no. You're not so different from God. You just haven't, conditions haven't allowed you to yet become like God yet. But here's your chance.